Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And good evening. The candidates need no introduction.
We are at a defining moment.
There you go again.
In 64 years of televised debates, there has never been one quite like this.
Graduated last in your class, not first in your class. Why would you answer that question? You went radical left. Will you shut up, man?
The incumbent president defending his record.
Are you with me?
A twice-impeached ex-president with a criminal record.
It is what it is. I took a mugshot.
Guilty, count 18. Guilty, count 19.
Guilty on all 34 felony counts.
With pressing issues facing the American people, reproductive rights, the economy, the border, and the preservation of democracy itself.
You will determine the outcome of this election. Vote, vote, vote.
Tonight, full team coverage with Rachel Maddow, Nicole Wallace, Joy Reid, Chris Hayes, Lawrence O'Donnell, Ari Melber, Stephanie Rule, Jen Psaki, plus Alex Wagner at the debate in Atlanta with California Governor Gavin Newsom, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock. MSNBC's special coverage of the first presidential debate begins now.
It's happening. It's finally here. Good evening. Welcome to our special live coverage of the first presidential debate of 2024. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump going head-to-head in Atlanta tonight, their first face-to-face meeting of any kind since the fall of 2020. Now, luckily, it's not like any big news has happened since the fall of 2020, so presumably they'll just pick up where they left off. We know you have every option of where to watch this debate tonight. We are really happy. We are honored that you are going to watch it here with us. We will have every second of this debate from the opening bell to whatever's going to be left of any of us by the end of it. I'm Rachel Maddow here at MSNBC headquarters in New York, joined by my beloved, well-rested, well-hydrated colleagues, Joy Reid and Nicole Wallace and Jen Psaki and Chris Hayes. We have all been really, really looking forward to this night, with the phrase looking forward very loosely defined. Literally tens of millions of Americans are expected to watch tonight's debate, literally millions of them watching through their hands like this. There really has never been one quite like this in American history. For the first time, a sitting president and an ex-president will debate each other on live TV. That has never happened before. For the first time, this first presidential debate is happening months earlier than it ever has happened before. It's happening now in June instead of in September or October, which has been the timing for every other presidential televised debate. And, of course, for the first time, one of the two presidential candidates at this debate is a convicted felon, found guilty recently on 34 felony counts. He will be facing the possibility of being sentenced to prison time just 2 weeks from today, exactly 2 weeks after the debate, the first presidential debate of the election cycle. Absolutely bananas. To be totally candid, the reasons this debate tonight is so highly anticipated, the reasons tonight's debate may have the highest television audience of any debate ever in U.S. history, those reasons are themselves unique. Each of these men is the oldest candidate ever nominated by their political party. Donald Trump was the oldest incoming president in U.S. history until Joe Biden broke that record. Now both of them are running again, 4 years after they ran the first time. Each of them both shows signs of aging, and each spends considerable time needling the other one about seeming old and out of it. It has been a campaign topic and a campaign tactic used by each side. No one quite knows what it will mean on the debate stage tonight. Also, in ways both related and unrelated to their age, just because of who they are and how they talk, there are worries on both sides about the unpredictability of each of these candidates. They are each unpredictable, even in the best of circumstances. That, on the debate stage, would seem to indicate a higher than usual prospect of a catastrophic gaffe or outrage by one or both of them. Also, neither of them has debated in years. Yes, they debated each other before in the previous election cycle, but the fall of 2020 was a very long time ago, and a lot has happened since then. And in this election cycle, neither one of these candidates participated in primary debates at all, which is not unusual for President Biden because he's the incumbent president, and there was no serious challenge to him within his own party. But it was very unusual for Trump, who is not an incumbent president and who ran in a very contested GOP primary in which there were multiple debates for the other candidates, which he nevertheless decided to skip. And finally, perhaps the main reason this debate tonight is so highly anticipated when we're anticipating such a large audience is because the stakes of this election just feel cataclysmically high. Just to take two examples, this is the first presidential election in the wake of the Republicans' violent effort to stop the transition of power and to keep their candidate in power by force and fraud after he lost the last election. They have nominated that same candidate again, and the expectation for a recurrence of those tactics to contest or otherwise defy election results again this year is basically a 100% expectation. It is also the first election after the conservative supermajority that Trump created on the Supreme Court with his 3 Supreme Court appointments. It is the first election since that court overturned Roe versus Wade and set off the cascade of increasingly draconian abortion bans across Republican-controlled states, with a national abortion ban now potentially on deck and Republican attacks on both fertility treatment and birth control revving up in multiple states. Now, as for how tonight's debate will work, for the first time in more than 30 years, this presidential debate tonight is not run by the nonpartisan, independent Commission on Presidential Debates. Instead, it's a cable TV network who's running it, CNN. The debate will take place at CNN studios in Atlanta. It'll be moderated by the network's Jake Tapper and Dana Bash. As I said, though, and as I want to emphasize, you can watch every single second of the whole debate right here on MSNBC with us tonight. Unlike most televised presidential debates over the last few decades, there will be no audience for tonight's debate in the room. So that means you will hear and see no crowd reaction. That means that there will be no playing to the crowd for either candidate. The moderators will also have the ability to mute candidates' microphones when the other candidate has his turn to speak. There will be no opening statements. There will be closing statements. The order of those closing statements was decided by a coin toss. There was a coin toss that President Biden won. He was then given the choice of choosing either the order of the closing statements or which podium he would like to stand at on the stage. President Biden decided to choose his podium. He will stand at the podium on the right side of our TV screens tonight. That meant that former President Trump got to choose whether he wanted to go first or second in the closing statements. He chose to go second. So as I said, this is a really different debate than we have had before. So I'll just mention, I know I just went through all those rules kind of quickly. We're going to run through those rules one more time before they actually kick off, so you know exactly what to expect in terms of the format. But yeah, here we go. This is quite literally going to be a debate like no other. You guys, I'm poking fun a little bit about the fact that we're going to be watching through our hands. Jen and Nicole, I wanted to go to you guys first just because I know that in your previous lives you have prepared candidates for debates. Do you feel like that gives you a perspective on what's going to happen tonight that's more or less fraught than the rest of us feel?
I'm going to, for the first time ever, not answer your question because I want to try to not compare this to anything that's ever happened before.
Okay.
And so I didn't have to prepare anyone to debate someone who was going to end the American experiment. I didn't have to prepare anyone ever to debate someone who was going to lie everything that he said. I've never had to prepare someone who was reporting for sentencing in a week. I mean, I never had to prepare anyone to debate someone that was fundamentally against the idea that the country was founded on. So I have ideas for how you do it. I have no idea how they did it. My deepest sort of up at night, gut aching fear is that we do things like we always do them, right? We ask people like me, how did you prep, Sarah Palin and George Bush and Dick Cheney? But one thing about Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney sat down. And so it's so funny to me that neither of these guys, who are both older than Dick Cheney, are sitting down. I mean, there's some things like on the style side.
Did Dick Cheney negotiate to sit down because he was old?
And he was debating the youngest, it was against John Edwards. But I mean, I think it's hard. I don't know why he sat down. But so there's style things that I wonder when I watch this. But there's no parallel to what we're about to watch.
Definitely not. And they can't pretend like it's the same as prepping Obama to debate Mitt Romney. First of all, Mitt Romney, I mean, he looks really great right now, let's be honest. I do think if you're the Biden team, though, you have to think about what you can control. I mean, you can't control how Trump is going to behave. You have to prepare to react to it. But you can control how President Biden is, or he can control it. And so if you're them, you're thinking about what is the best version of Joe Biden? The best version of Joe Biden is empathetic, Scranton Joe, speaking in English, right, in very accessible language. He does have a gut instinct about that. I mean, I know every time I use an acronym, he would chide me for that. That was what he would get upset about. The worst version, or the vulnerability that, I don't know if it keeps me up at night in the same way as the future of our democracy, Nicole, but is him trying to prove himself, right? And he has a tendency to do this. And I know this from working for him for a year and a half.
Prove himself?
Meaning his vulnerability is when he's like, I need more data points. I need lists of data points. And you've seen him with note cards, right? Note cards that have data on numbers. Exactly, Chris. They're long lists of numbers. GDP, job creation, the infrastructure bill, and how many jobs have been created in Pennsylvania. If he starts giving those statistics and data, you start to lose the audience. And I think that is a thing if you're on the Biden campaign. You're just hoping he doesn't go to prove myself, I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder, I'm very smart, and I've done a lot for this country mode. He goes to empathetic Scranton Joe mode. And that is something he can control. He can't control how Donald Trump behaves.
This connects to what I see as one of the main questions from the Biden perspective, which has been a bedeviling question for Democrats in the era of Trump, which is how much do you go after Trump for being abnormal sui generis, right? And how much do you go after him for being a normal Republican? What I mean by that is Trump is such a singular figure. If people are not yet decided they don't want him, the question is the group of people that are still like, maybe, kind of you think know about what a weird guy he is. Do they know that, like, he's going to raise your taxes for this cockamamie tariff plan, and he's going to cut rich people's taxes, and he's going to take another run at the Affordable Care Act, and they'll probably try to sign an abortion ban? All the sort of normal stuff that, again, Nancy Pelosi had a theory of the case in 2018, which was the Affordable Care Act, kitchen table stuff, basically run against this guy like a normal Republican. In 2022, the theory of the case was Dobbs and democracy, right? Don't run against him like a normal Republican. Talk about the democracy issue. These battles have been playing out in circles of Democratic politics about how much relative emphasis to give those two kinds of attack. And that's the thing that I don't have a strong feeling. I think they're both necessary, but navigating that is going to be really interesting because there are a lot of people who know Trump's bad, but like he is literally proposing the most insane sales tax on all international goods that anyone has ever proposed, and no one knows that.
But I think that here's what I worry about, and this is as someone who's on the other side of Democrats. If Democrats are defending the price of stuff as being not as bad as it was before, and I promise it's going to keep getting better, they will lose. They will lose. If you are defending the price of anything, you will lose. Everything's too expensive, and it sucks. But if you're not taking the tar off of Donald Trump every minute of every hour of every day between today and Election Day, you're losing. Because economists CBS reported this morning when I woke up, Trump's tariff plan will raise inflation to levels higher than they've been at any point in the economic tumult of the last 10 years. So it doesn't matter. To me, I don't care what he decides to talk about, but on every single metric, Trump would make it worse.
I think it's how you take the tar off, right? Because I agree, it can't be the data, and I don't think it's the tariffs argument. It is, though, Trump has been able to run as sort of this outsider, right? This I'm going to shake things up change maker. And I think if you're Joe Biden and the Biden team, you need to say, like, this guy is not a change maker. This guy wants to extend tax cuts for corporate America and the highest income. That was the argument, by the way, in 2012 that Barack Obama basically ran against Mitt Romney on when he was the incumbent president. But that's still, I don't think it's the totality of his only goal in the debate, but I think this is a moment where he could maybe break through with an argument like that he has a hard time doing, like, on the stump.
Joy.
So As often happens on these panels, I am exactly where Nicole Wallace is. It's kind of amazing how she kind of channels my anxieties, like, directly. I don't think I've ever gotten more Statler and Waldorf texts from friends. I've gotten that Muppet. I get it, the two Muppets. I get it. Everybody's saying it. But what I cannot get past, I asked my wonderful intern, Kendall, to look this up. This debate is going to be at CNN headquarters in Atlanta. That is 5,280 feet, 10 minutes on the Google Maps away from the Fulton County Courthouse. This is in so many ways a return to the scene of the crime, right, for Donald Trump. Literally, they are in the state tonight that he tried to steal. One of the states he tried to steal in 2020, literally from the man who will be standing feet from him. It is very difficult for me to get my mind around the fact that Joe Biden comes back to Georgia as only the second Democrat to win Georgia, other than Bill Clinton in 1992 and Jimmy Carter, who won it twice because he was the governor of Georgia. That's what Joe Biden is coming back as. He's coming back as a president who has a record, who can talk about the things he's done for the economy, who can make a case that I still have the stamina to do this, which I think is really his main job, is to get people who are nervous that he doesn't have anything to do 4 more years. But Donald Trump is coming back as the guy who literally refused to peacefully transfer power to the guy standing just to his right. And that is so bizarre for me. It's so odd that I can't get past it to get to strategy.
He's going to be standing on stage in a state where he's under indictment on multiple felonies, including a RICO indictment.
And he should be on trial right now. If you think about it, if events were normal, if the world was still Earth One, the way it is for the way it should be, he would be on trial right now in a RICO case with 18 other defendants in this state of Georgia. Fonnie Willis, the person that he has sicked his people on to try to get her killed for prosecuting him, is here. The 2 poll workers probably are within less than half an hour from where he is tonight. He has returned to the place where he tried to get them killed for just counting votes. Like, he literally is returning to within 10 minutes of the scene of a crime. And he is still awaiting indictment for that crime. And how are we a country that allows that man to stand with the actual president and debate gas prices and food prices? This is insane.
Well, and that's why if he pulls out a card and gives me a data point on anything, I might scream so loud that it comes through. You know, I mean,
we'll all be screaming with you.
I mean, because here's the thing. First of all, that he is a convicted felon isn't a point, or it's who Trump is. It's who he's standing across. And not only should he be on trial in Georgia, he should have been tried already by Tanya Chutkan. I mean, so to me, this is not a contest of whose policies will lower the price of eggs faster. If he doesn't draw the contrast between what person did with the precious privilege of being the commander-in-chief, stowing state secrets at his, whatever it is, golf club, refusing to give them back, waving them around in front of his current campaign manager, overthrowing an election, hanging Mike. I mean, if all the things that Trump did out loud and publicly and is now running on aren't central, I think it was Joe Biden that said about Rudy Giuliani, it's a noun, a verb, and 9/11. I mean, Donald Trump is a noun, a verb, and a criminal.
And by the way, this is where we get to what Joe Biden's job are. He has 2 jobs to me tonight. Number one, the stamina issue. It is the thing that concerns most people about him. He can't get away from it. He shuffles when he walks. He's an old guy, right? But I do think, to Nicole's point, his other big job is to turn to that man and say, that is not a president. Whatever else you think that he is, what he's not is an American president. I'm an American president because you know what I do? I get up every day and try to figure out how to lower your prices, how to make your life affordable, how to defend our country, defend the West. That's what I do. You know what he did? He tried to overthrow the government. He tried to get our fellow citizens killed. He doesn't care about you. If he comes back in, he's vowing to literally fire 50,000 federal workers, cage migrants, to put them in cages. That is not a president. If Joe Biden can't do that, then he really is in trouble.
You know, I would also say, too, that if you think about between 2020 and 2024 in Georgia, the other thing that's changed is that what happened in Georgia is that the Republican establishment in the state of Georgia did not bend and did not do what Trump wanted, which is why he was not able to overthrow that election. I mean, they fired a U.S. attorney, and they arguably committed, according to the state of Georgia, who indicted Trump for this and committed felonies trying to pressure election administrators into not doing their jobs. What's different now? The reason that case, in large part, has not gone forward in Georgia is because the Republican establishment, the Republican power structure in the legislature there, has decided to take Fani Willis apart. They have decided to remake the structure of the judiciary in the state of Georgia so that effectively the legislature can fire prosecutors when they bring charges that Republicans in the legislature don't want. And they've got Fani Willis under subpoena, and they're bringing it into the Senate, and they've created this scandal around her, and they're trying to remove her from the case. And that has pushed the water uphill to slow that case down after indictment and keep it out of the courts. And that is not Donald Trump's doing. And that's the most important thing. It's the Republican Party's doing. And the Republican Party has, since 2020, been brought completely within the project of Trump's efforts to defy election results and stay in power without them. And that is something that wasn't true 4 years ago.
And the moderators must bring this up. You cannot be in Atlanta. CNN used to be based in Atlanta. This is their kind of hometown. And I hope that by the time we get through this 2 hours of debate, those things have been litigated. I think it is incumbent on these moderators to ask about the thing. The mugshot was taken 10 minutes from here. You must ask. You must ask him. And not the general, will you accept the results of the next election? He's been asked that 437 times. That's not the question, right? He needs to be asked specifically and presented with the facts of what he did and asked to answer for them. This might be the only debate. It might be the only chance to ask him.
Just to talk about Trump for a moment and his performance, which is at some level unpredictable and at some level totally predictable. Like the guy talks all the time. We know exactly what he sounds like and what he'll do. I do think we went back and looked at the 2020 footage. And one of the things I think it's important about that first debate, remember he was nuts, right? Interrupting the whole time. One thing that I've seen is that as Trump has receded a little bit in the memories, his edges have been sanded off a little bit, and he has been turned into a sort of like ridiculous and comical figure. You see this in meme culture all the time, where he is the subject of a million memes on social media and TikTok. They're actually pretty funny, and it's like, they're not flattering, but it's him as kind of like doofus or weirdo or like saying funny things. He's a nasty dude. He's mean. He's a bully. He says really vile, ugly, and gross stuff. I think that part of his personality, which is as president as ever been in who he is, has receded in public memory. And I think part of the job of Joe Biden tonight is to kind of call that forward and call that out, because it's important for people to remember that.
And point at it and just tell the public what it is that they're
also
seeing.
His narcissism. His narcissism, that he cares about himself and not anybody else. I mean, that's the third Joe Biden job, I would say.
Absolutely.
We are counting down until the first presidential debate of 2024. Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer is going to join us live here in just a moment. Stay with us. Here at MSNBC, we often say, watch what they do, not what they say. I think that's a good mantra in general. However, sometimes what they say really does point toward what they're going to do. And so watch this from 2016. As you watch this, think to yourself, did these things come to pass? Did the woman on stage here have a crystal ball?
One of the prides of this country is the peaceful transition of power, and that no matter how hard fought a campaign is, that at the end of the campaign, that the loser concedes to the winner. Are you saying you're not prepared now to commit to that principle?
What I'm saying is that I will tell you at the time. I'll keep you in suspense.
Well, Chris, let me respond to that, because that's horrifying.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, will happen. I will release my tax returns, and that's against my lawyers. They say don't do it.
So you've got to ask yourself, why won't he release his tax returns? And I think there may be a couple of reasons. First, maybe he's not as rich as he says he is. Second, maybe he's not as charitable as he claims to be. Or maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes.
That makes me smart.
That was the third presidential debate in 2016 between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Those were two of their debates. She may not have won the election in 2016, but she did win the I Can See Into the Future contest. Donald Trump would not commit to accepting the results of the election. We then, of course, went on to have the first non-peaceful transfer of power in our nation's history when he did not accept the election results. Donald Trump did, in fact, put 3 justices on the Supreme Court who did go on to overturn Roe versus Wade. And Donald Trump's finances and even his charity did turn out to become an issue. The Trump Foundation shut down as a fraud, and him racking up multiple felony fraud convictions, including tax fraud at his business. Joy now has a special guest.
Indeed, and also she might be a psychic. I think she should become the new psychic friend. Let us now introduce Governor Gretchen Whitmer of the great state of Michigan. Thank you so much for joining us, Governor.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you.
So let's talk about what you think President Biden needs to do tonight. There are a lot of different constituencies in your state that he does need to speak to. Let's start with union households. Surprisingly enough, it is not something that is a lock for Union Joe, even though he showed up at a picket line and has seemed to do all of the things. What do you think that he needs to do to move that vote in his direction?
I think elections and debates are always about the future, and what we are going to see tonight is a very stark contrast between a president who has been on the side of working people, who has done everything to onshore supply chains and grow good-paying jobs in this country, a president who has gotten historic money and investment in infrastructure, putting men and women to work, building up our infrastructure and good-paying union jobs. And so I do think that President Biden shows up with the receipts. The stark contrast is going to be a former president who doesn't have an agenda, doesn't have a vision, other than he's going to want to settle scores. And voters are smart. They're going to be looking for someone who's actually talking about what are they going to do in a second term. And so I expect to see President Biden really articulate what that is, to show people what could be with a second 4-year term. And I think that's really going to put him in good standing with many voters who are thinking about the same things. What is this country going to look like? What are my opportunities going to be? What about my kids?
On specific questions of affordability, on things like tariffs, are people aware, do you think, in Michigan, are Michiganders aware of Donald Trump's tariff plan, for instance? Are they aware of President Biden's chips and science investments? Like, are these things coming through for ordinary voters?
I think they're starting to. You know, the average person is a good, hardworking person who's just trying to put food on the table, get the kids off to school or camp or whatever they're doing this summer, and show up to work on time. So I do think, though, that as people see this historic Infrastructure Act, that's how we're fixing the damn roads in Michigan. That's how we're getting people connected to the internet. That's how we're bringing down the cost of energy and helping people afford solar, et cetera. This president has delivered. And so I do think that it's starting to seep in, but we have to give people a little bit of grace. We know that the average American is working really hard and struggling to get ahead, and this president cares about them and has delivered, and it's making that easier.
We know that in Michigan there's a sizable Muslim and Arab population in places like Dearborn. If the question of Gaza comes up, what would you want to hear from President Biden on that would actually be compelling, particularly to younger voters in your state who might have issues with his policy?
Well, I think we all watch the violence that is happening with broken hearts, thinking about hostages and all the families that lost loved ones on October 7th, as well as my Arab American community and Muslim community and Palestinian communities, which are not all one and the same, but everyone is hurting, and I think that's the truth here. And so to understand that, to articulate that, yeah, we know people are hurting, and that's why we've got to have a president who is working toward a resolution to stop the violence, to return hostages, to make sure that there is a plan so that both of these communities can survive and have a home place, versus a former president who talked about a Muslim ban, who degrades and denigrates communities of color regularly. I think that most people know that a Trump presidency is not only going to not improve the situation in Gaza and Palestine and Israel, it could make it measurably worse. And that's why I think it's important to recognize the pain that people are feeling, but also the solution that he's working toward.
Governor Whitmer, it's Jen Psaki. We've been having this discussion tonight here about how much of this debate should be about democracy, Trump's criminal convictions, indictments, the fact that it's in Georgia, of course, where everything is being delayed, versus all of the kitchen table issues you've been talking about, whether it's health care or the economy. What would you like to see in terms of the balance of topics and discussion? We're obviously not in a normal election year, given who Joe Biden's running against.
Right. Well, you know, President Biden has a wealth of things that he can talk about. He's showing up with the receipts on everything from protecting women's rights to ensuring that we've got common sense gun safety measures to onshoring supply chains and strengthening our domestic economy with low unemployment. All of that being said, an overarching concern that many have is the effort to undermine our democracy. This is a lingering and very real and genuine concern after January 6th. All of that being said, the dinner table issues are always, I think, what is going to be front and center for voters, what they're going to make a decision on. And that's why tapping into recognizing no one person can control global inflation, but what this president has done is help people keep more money in their pockets, help people create a path to prosperity for them and for future generations of Americans, our kids and our grandkids. Thinking about climate change, he has gotten more done and has plans for the next four years. Contrast that to someone who's running on grievance and settling scores and wants to further erode women's rights and offshore supply chains. I think that it's a very clear contrast about who's on the side of the American people, and that's Joe Biden.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer of the great state of Michigan, thank you very much. Rachel?
It's great to have Governor Whitmer here. I have to say, it is it, I mean...
They call her Big Gretchen.
They call her Big Gretchen. But, I mean, we're all clear that she's going to be a presidential candidate,
Clearly.
if not a president, for sure. I mean, that's just a granted...
If we still have elections.
If we still have elections.
We're going to have elections. We're going to have elections.
If there are elections, you can be sure that she's going to be in them. It's just it can become more and more clear over her time as governor that she's headed for a national stage. All right, joining us now from the spin room is NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, tell us what you've been seeing. Tell us what it's like. We've been talking about how unique this debate set is, but a spin room is kind of always a spin room. Have you seen anything tonight that tips things for you in terms of what things are going to be like, or who's there to support the candidates, or anything else that can inform what we should be looking for tonight?
Hey, Rachel, everybody. Look, I think the question here for Donald Trump was which allies were going to show up tonight in his defense. Of course, those who are under consideration to be his running mate, his VP, now that Mike Pence, of course, is not seeking a second term alongside Donald Trump, is who was going to be here. And we have that answer, and that is J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator, Marco Rubio, the Florida senator. We've got Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor. You also have the likes of Tim Scott, the senator out of South Carolina. Each of them will be here in the spin room following tonight's debate. Individuals who are not here, as far as we know at this time, include Melania Trump, the former First Lady. And the reason I bring her up here is the fact that we have yet to see Melania Trump on the campaign trail with Donald Trump. He announced back in November of 2022. The one time we did see her at a quasi-campaign stop, it was when the two of them went and voted at a Florida polling location back in March. And at that point, she was asked whether she would be seen on the campaign trail ahead. And she said, quote, "Stay tuned." She has not appeared on any of the trials, the civil or criminal ones in New York. She was not there for any of his post speeches after any of his 4 criminal indictments. And so far, again, not on the campaign trail. And the contrast there, if she does not come tonight, is the fact that Jill Biden, the current First Lady, is slated to walk out on stage at the close of tonight's debate alongside her husband, Joe Biden. And the question here is whether Melania Trump will do that alongside her husband, the presumptive Republican nominee.
Vaughn, can I ask you a super awkward question about that specifically? If Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, after the debate is over, walks out, grabs the president's hand, yay, I'm here, and Melania Trump still has not arrived on site, Can somebody else play that role? I mean, there's no audience there. There's no, like, it's very tightly controlled. In the 2 commercial breaks there's going to happen, they're not allowed to speak to anybody who's there to support them. So all of this stuff is very tightly calibrated according to what's been negotiated between the 2 campaigns and CNN in advance. Is it only a wife who gets to walk out on stage, or could he pick, like, his favorite minion to walk out there with him?
We are told that one other close family member would be able to walk out on stage with him, but we know that Don Jr. is not going to be here tonight because of a prior family event related to one of his children. Eric Trump, we have not seen so far here, but he could be here. And of course, Ivanka Trump could be an option, but Ivanka Trump, much like her mother-in-law, has not appeared on the campaign trail through this election cycle either.
NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much, Vaughn. I appreciate it. We'll be back to you soon. I know.
Thanks,
you guys all know behind the scenes that my big bet, my big shoot the moon bet on Trump's vice presidential pick is Ivanka.
Oh.
Is who I think he's going to pick.
I think he would want to. I think he would want to.
If she would do it.
I don't think it's any of those dudes. I think it's Ivanka, and I think it always has been. And so I don't. But I mean, how do I? I thought it was going to be President Romney in 2012. So
I thought the dark horse here. I thought we were going to get to the often neglected Tiffany Trump. Maybe Tiffany's there.
A job. She's got a billionaire husband.
She's doing all right for herself. But I'm just saying, maybe she could be the one that goes out, the family member, because I feel like she often is not included in the same category.
Which is why.
So are you picking her to be nice, or are you picking her because you think she's a contender?
I don't know. What can I say? I'm a bleeding heart. I'm a squish. I just want to see get some
underdog daughter.
inclusion and love.
I don't think we should. Who knows who? I mean, she might show up because if Trump cares about one thing, right, it's the casting and the shot.
Yeah.
And he knows
It's a weird
that
shot without anyone.
Correct.
Yes.
And he knows that she is. She's his best wife right now, right? She's the only one. I think she's the third wife. But I think Trump is acutely aware in his own reptilian survival way that it would be very helpful to have her there. And whatever, no one ever knows what goes on in marriage. I certainly have no idea what's going on. But I wouldn't rule out her being there by the end.
There might be a prenup. I mean, we don't know what the agreement is.
I mean, there is. I mean, be on the lookout for stunts. This is a very closely regulated.
Yes.
Debate,
which I think is good, actually,
with the microphones off and no audience and the red lights that are going to signal to them, and I mean all the stuff that's been negotiated. Sure, but that doesn't mean, and they can't have props, they can't bring notes. We were talking about note cards. They cannot bring note cards. They cannot talk to anybody. It's very tightly regulated.
But do we think that's a good thing?
Well, whether or not it's a good thing, I don't think it means that we should preclude the possibility that somebody will try to pull a stunt. Yeah. Donald Trump has not announced his vice presidential candidate.
Right.
His 4 leading contender men are there. His wife does not appear to be there, but we also don't know who's going to be on his arm when at the end, when Jill Biden walks out.
And it might be his biggest audience that he gets in quite a while. So if he's going to do something wild, this would be the night.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It's an interesting
But we won't talk about this on TV. It'll be too weird. All right, we're now a little over an hour away from the start of the debate. The great Steve Kornacki is going to walk us through the state of the race, what the candidates could gain or lose tonight. We've got a lot still to come. Stay with us. Big night.
I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
But you
I just
agree.
want to make sure.
Joe, you're the liar.
I want to make sure.
Graduated last in your class, not first in your class.
I want to make
Mr.
sure.
President, can you let him finish, sir?
No, he doesn't know how to do that.
Last time was fun. Joining us now at the big board is the great Steve Kornacki. Steve, we know you've been looking at numbers, crunching that sort of data-driven approach to this in terms of thinking about what's at stake and who is persuadable. We're expecting tons of people to watch tonight. Let's talk about the scenarios for each of these guys.
Yeah, well, let's start off just where the race stands right now. This is the average of all the polls basically over the last month nationally. To do that, you get Trump 44.5 and you get Biden 43.6. So that's a difference of 9/10, of basically a 1-point race in the averages right now. Close, I know, what a surprise. So what does coming into tonight, though, Biden as an incumbent president, he has this particular challenge. And what you're seeing here, these are all the incumbent presidents in the era of television debates here since 1980 at least. What was their approval rating coming into the first debate? You see Biden's average is just 40.7%, and the ominous company that puts him in is Jimmy Carter, 1980, George Bush Sr., 1992, even Donald Trump 4 years ago, who was actually a little bit higher in the approval rating. All of them them lost re-election. You see who the candidates who won re-election were: Obama, Bush, Clinton, and Reagan. A fair distance between Biden and them. So one thing Biden obviously needs to do tonight in other settings is get that number higher if he can. Now, take a look at this in terms of expectations, however. This is interesting. A New York Times Siena poll out just yesterday asked folks watching this debate, what do they expect? Will Biden do well or not well? A plurality said not well. Same question of Trump. A pretty big majority said he'll do well. So the expectations on this are that Trump's going to have a better night than Biden. Now, how does that play out? Does that set a lower bar for Biden that might, work to his advantage? That's an interesting dynamic here, the gap in expectations for these candidates. And, of course, I think one of the reasons for that gap can be found in the next number, also from that same New York Times Siena poll. They asked about the issue of age, and they asked a very specific question. It was this: is the age of a candidate such an issue that the candidate is not capable of handling the job of president? And when asked that way, it's basically a 3-to-1 difference. 45% said that applies to Joe Biden. Only 16% said that applies to Donald Trump. So again, that's the doubt I think that Biden's dealing with here. That's the reason the expectations are low for him. Flip it around. If you're Biden, that's also the opportunity, because if this is holding you back, what you're looking at right here, you got 90 minutes tonight to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump with no one else in between. You have the opportunity potentially to allay a lot of those doubts. So we'll see what happens there. But then when we say opportunity, it's also this question, Quinnipiac. This is a Quinnipiac poll, and they asked people watching the debate tonight, is there a chance because of it you'll change your mind? Now, what people say they'll do versus what they actually do are often different. But just to give you a sense, 16%, that's not a small number in the context of a close presidential race nationally. 16% said they may change their minds, and that's evenly distributed here. Biden supporters and Trump supporters, and especially, this is that wild card group that could end up swinging the election. The people right now who say they're voting for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a third of them said they might change their minds based on what happens tonight. So, for either candidate, too, a particular opportunity with that third-party vote that exists right now.
Steve, in terms of that last slide that we're looking at there, are those people who say they are going to be watching the debate?
Yes, this is, if you watch it, is there a chance it will change your mind is how it's asked right here. So
you got to think the number of people who are supporting Robert F. Kennedy who are still going to be watching the debate. A, they know enough about politics to be supporting Robert F. Kennedy. B, they're going to be watching the debate even though they know he's not in it. And C, then they say they are persuadable. It seems to me like you've got to be talking about 4 people there. It just can't be, be a large number.
The one thing that you find in a lot of these polls, too, is that people, when offered the third-party option, they don't necessarily have an allegiance to that candidate. It's more a way of expressing, I don't want the 2 major party candidates. So to the extent that's a thing here, that may be a different group of voters than people who agree with Kennedy on a lot.
Steve, thank you very much for that. Ari Melber, a dear friend, joins us. Ari, I have to say, if we were behind the John Rawlsian veil of ignorance and we did not know which candidate was which, I would rather be the candidate who most people were expecting to do poorly than be the candidate who most people are expecting to do well.
I love a John Rawls reference, very big in law school. I think you're absolutely right. And what's so interesting is, while that sounds believable that many people expect Trump to do well, those same people lived through 2020, watched him debate, and kicked him out of office. So at a minimum, those debates didn't help Trump. I think they hurt him. And the thing about Joe Biden that's interesting is, look, to the extent you can be objective about any of this, you're referring to people's reactions. So people have different debating preferences. But best we can tell from reactions, Joe Biden has had better debate experiences than Donald Trump. He has more experience than any living candidate in debates on the national stage, because he's been on the VP ticket, because he's run for president 3 times, having secured the nomination once and is doing it again. So he's debated more than anyone, and he's pretty good at it. And the jitters, the bad debates you have to get through, he kind of got through them a long time ago. So it's interesting that Biden begins tonight both a little bit underestimated on the debate stage, but having proven himself where after debates, people vote for him.
Yeah, and I think he does benefit from Joe Biden. And this is very consistent. It happened before the State of the Union. People almost have no expectations. They never have high expectations of Joe Biden. They used to say about Reagan, they misunderestimated him. Or no, it was George W. Bush. Sorry, that was George W. Bush. But I think the same thing is true. It was George W. Bush. But I think the same thing is true of Joe Biden. He's been such a constant figure in our politics for so long that people almost sort of have an amnesia about him, too. And that people forget, wait a minute, this guy's been doing this since he was 29 years old. He's run for president multiple times. times. He's been on the debate stage with multiple people. You know, he's debated 8 other Democratic nominees and got the nomination. Younger ones, people of color, all of these varieties of people. Pete Buttigieg, great communicator. He beat them all and got the nomination. So he has some quality and skill that people just are always surprised when he actually
in the Democratic Party, he was almost like furniture.
Yeah.
It was like 40 years it's there. You don't see furniture when it's there every day, but sometimes you go back.
You don't have the right furniture, Don.
Maybe I'm giving away more than I mean to. But sometimes you don't see it, and then when you sit in a good, comfy chair, you remember, oh, wait, actually, this is familiar in a good way.
Yeah. But the thing I wanted to add to your point about State of the Union is he didn't just exceed expectations for the text of the speech, where he started by quoting Reagan with foreign policy, kind of a place no one thought he would go, and sort of grabbing the Reagan mantle because there's no competition for that really in today's Republican Party. But his best moment was an ad lib. It was when they started jeering about a crime committed by someone in the country illegally. And Biden said, whoa, whoa, whoa. And he pointed to the Republican Senator Langford, I think, who mouthed, it's true, and corroborated Joe Biden saying, I tried to fix immigration. I went along with all the Republican ideas. Trump killed it. So the State of the Union exceeded expectations, but its high point was an ad lib where he tried to grab the upper ground on immigration.
Which was substantively important, but also stylistically important in terms of, is he on his toes? Is he in command of the situation?
I do think that the upside that Steve pointed out is crucial, but I also think that polling is part of the issue for Biden right now. And the reason this race is where it is that there's an expectation of the president being a larger-than-life figure. It's the bully pulpit, right? Like, particularly in the media age. And in 2020, I think there was a little bit of exhaustion with how much larger than life Donald Trump was and also the job that he was doing. Joe Biden is not sort of an omnipresent person. Yeah. In the sort of public imagination. Donald Trump still kind of is, at least the thought of him. And the idea that that number is so skewed, 60% think he's going to do well, it's like, dude, have you watched him talk recently? Yeah. And again, it's the branding, the sort of salesman shtick. The reason it's effective is because you just repeat this sort of like boast enough times, it sort of like lodges somewhere in the back of people's minds. I thought that was a very interesting polling result that speaks to me about where we are in this race.
But it's a reminder that it is as one of the former hardball executive producers used to say, it's television. And the thing about it's television.
That's good.
And the reality is, since John F. Kennedy, this business has, the business of politics has really gone to the person who has some performative skill. Yeah. There's a reason that President Obama is sort of a larger-than-life figure, not just being the first black president, but he had like a command of television.
And Bill Clinton as well.
Bill Clinton as well. Yeah. And Ronald Reagan, who was a performer, a natural performer. What Donald Trump has in the television, the advantage he has on television, and he's literally a television actor. Yeah. He was on a hit TV show for a long time, so people, number one, have a comfort with him that sort of belies how cuckoo he is, because they're comfortable with him from The Apprentice, so they know that guy, and he performs for them and entertains them. And so as people are entertained, in a way, they sort of put aside that, well, he's talking like a Nazi, but he's doing it with shtick.
Right.
And so he's able to get away with things because of his television skills. Yeah. And hopefully tonight, Joe Biden will bring out the other stuff, which is his meanness and his cruelty and his nastiness and the real person that he is, not the person he portrays.
The one thing that Donald Trump does not do on television is interact with people who give as good as they get.
Correct.
And that's what Joe Biden will put him up against tonight. That question and more when we come up. When we come back, our countdown continues to this critical debate taking place tonight in about 1 hour in Atlanta. Stay with us. We're about an hour away from the first presidential debate of 2024. We're going to have every second of it right here on MSNBC. We know you could watch this anywhere. We are very grateful that you are watching it here with us. We are going to make a night of it, and we are going to have more fun than anybody else, so please don't leave. Now, obviously, in every presidential debate, each candidate tries to paint a dire portrait of what the country will look like if their opponent, heaven forbid, is elected instead of them. Well, here was one such prediction from Donald Trump when he faced off against Joe Biden 4 years ago.
We are on the road to success, but I'm cutting taxes, and he wants to raise everybody's taxes, and he wants to put new regulations on everything. He will kill it. If he gets in, you will have a depression, the likes of which you've never seen. Your 401ks will go to hell, and it'll be a very, very sad day for this country.
If he gets in, you will have a depression, the likes of which you have never seen. Your 401ks will go to HE double hockey sticks. It will be. Joe Biden did get in. Has he presided over a catastrophic depression, as Donald Trump predicted? Under Joe Biden, we just had the best year of American job creation in the 21st century. The last time we had a streak this long of unemployment below 4%, it was the early 1960s. Under Joe Biden, the United States has the best economy in the world. The World Bank just said the U.S. economy is so good, it is actually stabilizing the whole world economy. About those 401ks, which Donald Trump said would immolate if Joe Biden got in there, actually they have got up 11% on average last year. That is thanks in large part to the stock market under Joe Biden repeatedly hitting all-time record highs, with the Dow topping 40,000 for the first time ever just last month. In other words, a hellscape of economic depression. That Donald Trump prediction about a terrible economy under Joe Biden, it did not age well. That has its own consequences in terms of the substantive state of the economy heading into this presidential election, and Joe Biden making the case that the American people ought to return him for another 4 years. But my colleague Chris Hayes has been focused all this year on this key question of whether you are better off than you were 4 years ago.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, on my show, we have been trying to help answer that one question that does come up basically every presidential campaign.
Remember Ronald Reagan talking about Jimmy Carter?
Ronald Reagan used to ask,
Are you better off?
are you better off?
Are you better off?
Are you better off?
But are we better off?
It's not whether we're better off, it's whether they're better off.
Are you better off?
Better off.
Better off. Better off.
Better off. Better off.
Better off.
Better off.
Better off.
Better off than you were 4 years ago?
Now, it does come up every time, but as I've said, if you were the Trump campaign, maybe you don't want to ask it this time around, right? We were all there because 4 years ago was June 2020, and this is what it looked like.
Tonight, we have passed yet another milestone in this country, as today, the number of coronavirus cases topped 2.5 million. That includes more than 125,000 deaths. And tonight, much of the focus is on the southern and southwestern states where cases are mounting.
We did so well before the plague, and we're doing so well after the plague.
Now, this video obtained by the Washington Post raising questions. The Trump campaign asked why workers were appearing to remove stickers promoting social distancing. This one reading, "Do not sit here, please." ABC News confirming the Post report that the campaign directed those stickers to be taken down. A campaign official says the rally was in full compliance with local requirements. Those attending entering the arena at their own risk, signing a waiver agreeing not to sue the campaign if they get sick.
It was 4 years ago today, that story broke. The Trump campaign took those stickers off the seats. And it was significant because, remember, that was Trump's infamous rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, exactly 1 week earlier, the big back to the campaign rally, the one that everyone told him not to do because it would be a massive disaster.
For months now, large gatherings have been canceled. No concerts, no stadiums filled for sporting events. But tonight in Tulsa, Oklahoma, an arena is packed with thousands rallying for President Trump's re-election.
The president left Washington late today for a destination he has not seen in 110 days, the campaign trail.
The event in Oklahoma is unbelievable. The crowds are unbelievable.
My preference would be that it be postponed until it's safe to actually have an event where people can come together and be a part of the political process.
Today, we learned 6 members of the president's advance team tested positive for coronavirus.
They will be given a mask. It's up to them whether to make that decision. CDC guidelines are recommended but not required. When you come to the rally, as if any event, you assume a personal risk. That is just what you do.
Of course, we now know Trump supporters were intentionally misled about that risk. One of those supporters was Herman Cain, the former Godfather's Pizza CEO, former Republican presidential candidate. That's him at the rally there on the left without a mask, not social distancing. Everyone's packed together. A week later, Herman Cain was in the hospital with COVID. He was there for a month, and he died on July 30th. Years later, Trump aide Cassidy Hutchinson wrote in her book that White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows told her, quote, "We killed Herman Cain." Trump's tragic and catastrophic handling of that once-in-a-century pandemic, the plague, was the defining characteristic of 4 years ago, although I think people kind of blocked it out a little bit. But also, 4 years ago today, the stock market was at 25,000. Today, it's at nearly 40,000. 4 years ago, the unemployment rate was at 11%. It's 4% today. 4 years ago was a summer of widespread unrest and then vigilante violence when Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 protesters, when the sitting president used tear gas on civil rights demonstrators to clear the streets for that Bible photo op, when he floated delaying the election because he was losing in the polls, when he sprung Roger Stone from prison so he could help with the efforts to steal said election. The country was in crisis every minute, palpable, life-altering crisis, day after day on multiple fronts. Our nervous systems were being constantly overwhelmed. So, yeah, ask yourself, take a second, remember, are you better off today than during the summer of chaos and despair 4 years ago?
Wow.
I think the answer is pretty clear, Rachel.
Chris, thank you for that.
Wow.
I know. Stephanie Rule joins us now. Steph, thinking about the economic part of this, you and I talked about this on my show on Monday night. How much of the Biden economy, the success of the Biden economy, can be characterized as just a bounce back from the artificial, externally imposed hardships of COVID? And how much of it is because the economy's been well managed?
I would say both. First, Chris's Are You Better Off segment is so damn good. Every single time I see it, I love it and hate myself that I didn't think of it. Just so you know. It's both. Like, we have had a bounce back. So it's not the best argument when the Biden campaign talks about where unemployment was and where it is, because the truth is, when Joe Biden took office, unemployment was super high because of the pandemic. That's not a great argument. But there are so many economic wins. We've talked about it many, many times when you look at our economy versus anywhere else in the world. But inflation looms large, and we can't deny it. So if the president gets up on the stage tonight and basically does his version of Chris's segment, it won't work because there are a lot of people who don't feel great. 2/3 of the people who are going to vote this year have never experienced inflation above 4% until now. They don't feel good. The president has to be aware of that. And what he needs to do is say, you're right, life's expensive, housing's expensive, gas is expensive, groceries are really expensive. But the guy next to me, Donald Trump, what he is proposing is disastrous. This week, 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists, not the Biden campaign, came out and said Trump's tariffs, his economic proposals, will be a bomb to inflation. They'll be disastrous. So that's what President Biden needs to thread tonight. He cannot say Bidenomics is great and the world is great, even though we've had a great recovery. Because, man, anybody you talk to will say life's expensive, and they have the right to say it.
And so even though the U.S. Economic recovery after COVID is better than every other major economy's recovery after COVID.
But when you go to the grocery store, you don't say to yourself...
Nobody feels what it's like here compared to feeling what it's like in other countries.
You don't say London broil costs more in Portugal.
The other thing, Ian Bremmer had this graphic that we used on my show when the G7 happened, where it was all the G7, they do the family photo, and it was the approval rating, the net approval rating of each of the leaders in the G7. And they're all really bad, okay? Yeah. And Biden's actually the second best of all of them. And the reason that they're all really bad in that photo is the exact same reason across the board. It's not like, the particular governing agenda of Macron or, Sunak or whoever. It's because everyone has experienced this. And to Stephanie's point, it's a really important point that I think can get lost. If you go back and you look at the 80s and Reagan, people had experienced inflation a lot more recently. At that level. This is, for 2/3 of the vote, the first time that things went crazy. And so you see it across the board. And also, I think what's a little bit reassuring, at least like gravity matters and the facts matter, is that Biden is doing better than, say, our neighbor to the north, Justin Trudeau, whose approval rating is much worse than Joe Biden's in an economy in Canada that's doing appreciably worse than the American economy.
But the other piece of it, though, because if you talk to young people like my kids' age, right, they're in their 20s, and part of it is comparative. So, when at my kids' age, I had them. and we could afford to have 3 kids, and we had a house, and even though it was expensive, we could afford to do those things, they wouldn't even think about having kids because they can't afford it. They can't afford their lives. They have to live with multiple roommates. Like the things that younger people, Biden's biggest issue on the economy, when you poll people and ask, do you think the economy is good in your state? They say it's good. And they say in the national economy, they say they think it's a recession. If you ask, how's your personal finances doing? In general, people would say, oh, I think I'm doing good. I'm doing well. But then you say, well, do you think the economy is good? They say, no, it's terrible. And so part of it is political. People have just decided the economy is bad, even when they're taking trips to Bali and they're heading off to Europe and they're packing the flights and they're
record travel this
So
summer.
everyone's got money, but if the people who don't have money and who can't afford their lives are millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah.
And that is also Biden's weakest cohort. And so it's the younger people who can't afford to do the things that their Gen X parents could afford to do at their age. They feel that acutely, that they actually can't afford to do the things their parents could do when they were in their 20s and 30s.
And neither of the people running for president have an inspiring message for them.
Right.
Well, in terms of what Chris, you were talking about and stuff, you were talking about in terms of Trump's policies.
Disastrous.
His gimmicky policies about like, oh, we'll get rid of all income tax. Won't that be fantastic? Well, instead just tax all purchases of, I mean, like the tariffs thing is insane. Now, when Biden goes to explain that tonight, which he inevitably will, is that going to sound like he's talking policy and numbers and that's too granular for people to get? Or can you talk about somebody else's policy proposals and the crazy economic impact they will have without it sounding like you're in the weeds?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's a difficult circle to square. I do think you could talk about the Trump tax. I mean, Trump is running on raising people's taxes. Full stop. Like, the Trump taxes, and that's even before we got to the, like, I compared it to wanting to rip up the highway system and replacing with canals. Like, that's how nuts this idea of, like, going back to the tariffs are. He's like, oh, McKinley. I love McKinley. Even before we get to that, even before that, he was saying, ring around the country, 10% tariff on all goods. Like, that's a 10% tax on every imported good. Everything. Avocados to iPhones. 10% tax. So, but now he's talking about what would be essentially a 150% tax. There's an estimate from a few economists ran numbers. It would be like a $5,000 a year increase. You don't have to get in the weeds to be like, he is proposing a $5,000 a year tax increase for middle class and working class families, which is A, backed up by the numbers, B, backed up by the fact that he not only floated this idea, but has been defending it in public, and C is like a thing that you can understand.
And he also has to explain, I think he has to do kind of 2 things. He has to say, yes, this guy is not only going to raise your taxes by $5,000, $10,000 and make your life more expensive, he's also going to cut billionaires' taxes. He's going to keep that tax cut that's giving them more money than you, and you didn't get anything from it. I'm saying that I'm going to let that tax expire. But then I think he does need to brag a little bit about the things he's done. Because the things that he's actually done economically have helped people. He can say, I'm the guy that lowered your granny's insulin prices to $35. She wasn't able to afford her insulin. Grandma can afford it now, and if you let me back in, I'm going to extend that to everybody with insulin. I'm the guy who has, 3 to 5 million people's student loans disappear. I know a couple of people who got the magical email, and they cried when they got it. $30,000, $40,000 disappeared from their ledger. So he can say, I'm the guy that's forgiving student debt. I promised I'd do it. I did it.
He can hit Trump between the eyes on America First, right? Because there's a lot of people who actually like the idea of America First. Donald Trump's idea was just isolationist, and he didn't do it. Joe Biden actually put forth the CHIPS Act, and that's changing the game, right? You are seeing in states like Arizona, in places like New Hampshire, huge manufacturing plants will be put in place, unlike Donald Trump, who said, I'm bringing Foxconn to Wisconsin and 8 gazillion jobs, and it never happened. So Joe Biden can turn the idea of America First right on its head and say, I delivered it in a good way, and it's happening.
Manufacturing jobs, construction jobs, Joe Biden walking the picket line with the UAW when they won a record contracts from the auto industry. I mean, all of that is very real.
I think the problem has been sort of illustrated by this conversation here. He can't try to do all of it.
Right.
He has to decide to do one thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's where stuff started. I mean, yes, stuff is expensive and that stinks and we all feel it. But you think it's expensive now, it'll be 10 times more expensive under this guy. And then I think he's got to pick 2 things. And I think that people that know as much as you all know, it's really hard to pick 2. But candidates have to pick 2 because voters will barely remember one.
Yeah.
Can I have one last thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
48 is the election I've been thinking about, which is Truman. It's the famous Truman, Dewey defeats Truman, right? He's selling it. And you think, well, we just came through the Great War. right?
Can I just interrupt you? I'm sorry. I was just going to talk about the 1946 midterm.
Oh, really?
And then you leave the 1948 presidential.
And you two are
Am I cannibalizing this?
This is a conversation that would only happen here.
When you said 1948, I thought to myself, in my whole life, I've never thought of that. Ever.
Here's why. Because
we come out of the war.
At one level, you think, okay, wow, we won. We beat the Nazis. We emerged from this unbelievably difficult period of, you had price caps and you had people working in factories and you had all of American life disrupted. And we come back to normal, and you would think people would be like, awesome, we're rocking. And it was not that at all. The national mood was incredibly dyspeptic. There was incredible amounts of Truman's disapproval. The 46 midterms were he got shellacked. 48, he was running behind the whole time because this lingering sense, even after this amazing victory, that things were still unsettled. And I think there's something to be learned there about that.
That's what you said in your amazing package, though. It wasn't in your script, it was an aside, but you said COVID, which no one deals with. It's this unprocessed bundle of grief and despair and loss, and we know all these people died. Lots of people know someone who did die. And we're so desperate to sort of put it all back together and act like, oh, nothing happened, nothing to see here, that it is this unprocessed collective grief that no one can deal with and no one can talk about.
Coming out of a catastrophe, the people who are in charge always get it. They always get shellacked, and it is because of the loss and grief and upset just being put on the people who are seen to be in charge of it. I mean, Churchill got turfed out. Churchill got turfed out at the end of the war too.
I literally had that thought in my head when you said that sentence.
As long, in addition to the word dyspeptic, that was the other thought.
All right,
only
much more to come as the debate in Atlanta draws closer. Sorry. One of Georgia's 2 Democratic senators is going to join us next, live from the site of the debate. We're going to talk with Senator Raphael Warnock just after this. Don't miss it. Stay with us. After the last presidential election between these same 2 candidates, which Chris Hayes, you will note, is a little bit like Adlai Stevenson and Dwight David Eisenhower. Running against similar, right?
Similar.
Just as long as we're talking 1940s and 50s politics. Yes, sorry. After the last matchup between these 2 candidates, January 6th will forever be known as the day that a candidate for president incited an attack on the Capitol to try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. But also on January 6th, that same morning, before the barricades were breached and before tear gas started flowing through the halls of Congress, the country was waiting for the results of a different transfer of power. Which party would control the United States Senate? The state of Georgia had been reliably red for decades. Barack Obama never won Georgia. John Kerry didn't win Georgia. Al Gore didn't win Georgia. But Joe Biden won Georgia. And as the Senate runoff results, the Senate election results came in on the morning of January 6, 2021, that very day, it became clear that Democratic Senate candidates John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock would win Georgia, too. And this year, Democrats very much want to keep Georgia in play. So far this year, Donald Trump has been leading in the presidential polls in Georgia. The latest this week, a new poll from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution showing Trump up by 5 points heading into tonight's debate in Atlanta. Our friend Alex Wagner is at the site of the debate. She is in the spin room in Atlanta, and she's standing by with Georgia's U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock, who's there in support of President Biden and his campaign. Hey, Alex.
Hey, Rachel. I am delighted to be here with Reverend and Senator Raphael Warnock. There's maybe no better person to talk about what is involved in really winning in the state than you. You had to run, I think, 79 times for the Senate, or 5, depending on what your math is. But one of the things I'm interested in is, you had to debate kind of a character who was sort of like the Trump of Georgia, Herschel Walker, a man that is prone to fisticuffs, at least verbally, maybe doesn't have the firmest grasp of the facts. Trump-like in character. You were on a debate stage with him, and you won not only the debate, but you also won the Senate race against him. And I wonder if there are lessons from that experience and that debate that you think are applicable tonight as Joe Biden tries to keep Georgia in his ledger.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. And I ran against somebody who was anointed by Donald Trump to run against me. And I think in many ways there are 2 peas in a pod. If Donald Trump is talking, you can be pretty certain that he's lying.
Yeah.
And here was someone who had spent his life focused on himself and running against someone whose whole life has been about service. That is the story of Joe Biden. And I think, look, the viewers get a chance tonight to see that there is a stark contrast between these two men. One has really spent his whole life focused on people. I think in Joe Biden's case, in many ways informed by his pain.
Yeah.
I think about that tragic story in the early days of his Senate career, of losing a wife and a child, and then later losing a son. And when you're with Joe Biden, either up close or from a distance, you see that this is a man who cares. And I think even as the candidates talk tonight, the thing that the people of Georgia and the people of our country have to ask themselves as each man talks, is this somebody who really cares? Because if we get outside of the culture wars, you know when you're talking about somebody who has a genuine interest in other human beings.
Yeah, an empath.
Somehow Donald Trump doesn't come up when I think about that.
I do wonder because the polling and the reporting consistently shows Joe Biden having an issue declining support among communities of color, specifically black voters, especially in the state of Georgia. When you are in the room with black voters, young voters in the state of Georgia, what are you hearing? How keyed in are they to this administration and its policies, a lot of which have been, particularly focused on policies that help the young and people of color?
So let me first of all push back against something that the Trump campaign has been pushing, and it's part of their spin. You're not going to see droves of black voters turn out to vote for Donald Trump. That's not going to happen. We need to make sure that our people show up, that the same coalition that elected me 5 times in Georgia shows up for Joe Biden. And I would be worried, Alex, if we didn't have a good record, if we didn't have a story to tell about the work that we've been doing in a very, very difficult time in our country. But the fact of the matter is black wealth is up 60% since the pandemic. And we've seen the shrinking of the racial wealth gap. Part of that is due to the fact that Joe Biden had the nerve, he had the audacity and the compassion to cancel student debt.
Yeah.
And it was Donald Trump who bragged that the Supreme Court, led by his nominees, slapped back the first effort of the president to cancel student debt. He did it anyway. And I can tell you this, I go in rooms all across the state, and over the last few months I've been doing this little exercise. I literally ask people, have you or anybody you know had their student debt canceled? I haven't been in a room yet where somebody's hand hasn't gone up. I have to tell you, I'm proud of that, proud that the president did it, proud that I pushed him to do it in our conversations. This narrows the racial wealth gap. And so what we've got to do is to help people to understand who did that.
That was my second question. Are they connecting that to this administration?
Well, I think it is the work of campaigns to keep telling the story. The same way it's the work of the preacher to keep preaching the gospel every Sunday morning. You don't get a Sunday off. You got to keep. It's still good news. It's still the gospel, but people have to hear it. And at the same time, again, I think that our country's been through so much over the last several years. A once-in-a-century pandemic. I think often about how many that we lost during 9/11, which was tragic.
Yeah.
About 3,000 people or so. We lost 1 million people in the pandemic. We've been through 20 years of war. And then on top of that, we have the demagogues of hate, division, revenge, and retribution and bigotry, just sowing the seeds of discord in the body politic. And in this sense, Trump is a plague on the American conscience. And so what we've got to do is we've got to ask who's going to actually make your life better? Who's going to be thinking about your family? Is it going to be the man who passed a $2 trillion tax cut for the richest of the rich?
Yeah.
Or the president who passed the single largest tax cut for middle and working class families in American history? His name is Joe Biden.
The facts are there. It's just getting people to listen to them. I'm going to go back to New York. Rachel, back over to you.
Alex, much appreciated. Trump is a plague on the
I just
conscience
wrote
of
that
the
down.
nation.
I'm putting it right now. I couldn't get to you two in the history lesson.
Pretty
No,
good.
it's
Written all
Senator
that
Raphael
down.
Warnock.
Pretty
That's
good.
very
Brilliant.
impressive.
Yeah.
All right. Every debate has its own rules. This debate tonight has rules that are different than the debates you are used to. We're going to let you know how it's all going to be run after this very quick break that we're about to take. I'm telling you it this way with this emphasis because this is going to be the last break we take before the debate starts. So do what you got to do. We'll be right back right after this. Primary debates, where candidates all in the same party debate each other to try to get their party's nomination for president, those have been weird and getting weirder for a long time now in our politics, especially on the Republican side, where by the time they got to their fourth debate, their fourth Republican primary debate this year in this cycle, that thing was moderated by a random podcast host and sponsored by a little-known right-wing social media company best known for hosting the neo-Nazis who get kicked out of everywhere else. And their leading candidate for the Republican nomination for president never seriously considered showing up for that debate or for any of the Republican primary debates this year. So the inter-party debates, the primary debates, started sort of going downhill a little while ago, perhaps bottoming out this year on the Republican side. General election debates, though, the actual presidential debates between actual presidential candidates, nominees of the major parties, those have been pretty normal. Those have at least been fairly predictable in format for decades now. Until this year, because of course we've had to go and throw that out with the bathwater as well. Following widespread speculation that neither of these candidates particularly wanted to face off again after their two debates 4 years ago, President Joe Biden finally dared former President Trump to debate him, saying, quote, "Make my day, pal." And in fact, by the end of that day, ta-da, a general election debate was scheduled. Bizarrely, it was scheduled for June. Here we are. And then a second one was scheduled 3 months after that for September. Now, neither of the two weird general election debates will be run by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates, which has done all of them for the past 36 years until this year. Instead, tonight's is run by our friends at CNN. September's will be run by our friends at ABC News. There was a funny moment this year when the Trump campaign belatedly tried to get a Fox News debate added after the fact, added to the CNN one and the ABC one, but the Biden campaign laughed them off about that. And so here we are. There will be two general election debates run by news organizations. And God bless CNN tonight. Good luck to them. They have a lot of responsibility here. The moderators from CNN, they have an impossible job, and they are under nuclear hot scrutiny. Jake Tapper and Dana Bash are both excellent and unflappable journalists and good people. They will, of course, be under nuclear hot scrutiny tonight, as any moderator is in a high-stakes debate like this. Worse, though, than usual, the Republicans, the Trump campaign, and the candidate himself, they have been relentlessly attacking Dana Bash and Jake Tapper before this event starts tonight. That, of course, is a form of working the refs to try to get them to treat you better, at least to be intimidated by you in the room. That, of course, will not work on professionals like Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, but it doesn't mean the Republicans in the Trump campaign aren't trying it. CNN will make a lot of important decisions tonight that may very well impact the way people judge the material performance of each of these candidates, the relative performance of each of these candidates. CNN will make the decisions on the set and the lighting and the camera angles and when to use split screen versus full screen shots of the candidates, whether to allow the camera to show the candidates even when their mics are muted. The event will take place at CNN studios in Atlanta. CNN already negotiated the terms and logistics for tonight with the campaigns, including the qualification requirements. As you have discerned by now, there will be just the two major party candidates debating tonight. The independent vaccine skeptic conspiracy theorist candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did not meet the threshold to participate under CNN's debate qualification rules for tonight, despite repeated multi-million-dollar investments from Trump donors to try to keep RFK in the race. Here are the rules tonight as we understand them in terms of how Biden and Trump will compete. There are no opening statements at the beginning. At the end of the debate, each candidate will get a 2-minute closing statement. There was a coin toss. The winner of the coin toss had the opportunity to choose either which side of the stage his podium would be on or whether he wanted to go first or second with his closing statement. Joe Biden won the toss. He chose to take the podium on the right side of your stage. That means you'll see him tonight on the right side of your TV screen. That left Donald Trump to choose whether he wanted his closing statement to be the first one or the second one. He chose to go second. The podiums for the two candidates are identical. Trump, as I said, will be on the left, Biden on the right. Candidates cannot bring any notes or any props. They will each be provided with a pad of paper and a pen and a bottle of water, and that's it. For each question they are asked, each candidate has 2 minutes to answer. Then the other candidate gets a 1-minute rebuttal. Then there can be a 1-minute response to that rebuttal. Then there's an extra minute that can be allotted at the discretion of the moderators. Yikes, pray for them. Importantly, it is not a candidate's time. If it is not a candidate's time to speak, his microphone will be muted. We don't exactly know how that's going to work in practice, but that's obviously a big deal in terms of how the overall dynamic and pace will happen tonight. A lot of the details of that are, again, going to be important, but also are uncertain before they start. I mean, if your mic is muted, but you're really hollering, is it possible that the speaker's microphone or the moderator's microphones might pick up your yelling from across the stage? If your mic is cut but you're yelling, will CNN show you mouthing words that can't be understood except by lip readers? I mean, we don't know. We're going to have to see how the candidates behave and how CNN handles it. There is a red light that signals timing. The red light will flash when there are 5 seconds left. It will turn solid red when time is expired. For 60-plus years, normal presidential debates had no breaks for commercials. Tonight, we're going to have ad breaks, 2 of them. During these 3.5-minute breaks, the candidates may not speak with any staff members or supporters who are there in the room. And as one final small mercy, there will be no audience tonight. So that means no playing to the crowd, no reaction from the crowd, and yet another variable that will seem weird and unusual to those of us who are used to watching debates like this. The whole enchilada slated for 90 minutes tonight. Those 90 minutes will either fly by or it'll be the longest 90 minutes of your life. We'll see. Lawrence O'Donnell joins us now. Lawrence, it's good to have you.
Well, let's talk about the most absurd of the rules, which, the way I see it, which, by the way, I just want to, at the outset, I usually don't get any agreement on this. The idea that you're going to have commercial breaks and you cannot talk to the staff or talk to anyone is breathtakingly absurd if you understand the job that we're talking about here. The job of the presidency has advisors in the room all the time. You are never alone.
Unless you're with Vladimir Putin.
Yes, you demand right. So that's the crazy thing. The other thing that never happens in the Oval Office is someone runs in and says, you have 2 minutes to tell me what your position is. So the 2-minute thing is nutty. The not having an opportunity to talk to advisors is nutty. All of that, because it has nothing to do with the job of the presidency. You won't see a single thing on display tonight except demeanor that has anything to do with the job of the presidency. If I was running this, they would get the questions in advance. I want your best answer, not the thing that comes off the top of your head. You could have as many staff people as you want out there. You could have your Secretary of State. You have anyone you want. You might have an incentive for appearances purposes to have as few as possible because of the way that would look. I want all of the staff mic'd, so that when you want to consult with them, I want to hear what advice they give you and what advice you reject and what advice you accept. And then we're getting close to what the job actually is.
I think we're pretty close to a very good reality show pitch.
I know.
And I'm ready to greenlight this.
Yeah.
I think that's...
Me too.
Now, we can test, by the way, the muted mics. If you mute Chris's mic right now and he yells at me, we'll find out.
We can't test because I never yell.
That's right.
Wait, control room, seriously, can we do that? Is it possible to just mute? Yes? Okay, Chris, you are muted. Yell at Lawrence.
I never yell. I maintain perfect equilibrium at all moments.
So is it going to work?
So, hey, on TV, could y'all hear him? Yeah. answering us. I don't know how this is going to work. I also, you were asking about this before, and I'm not sure. This may be a known unknown. I forget how that works. This may be something that is knowable, and I just don't know it. But who's riding the on and off buttons on the mics? Is that Dana and Jake who are doing that, or is that a control room thing?
Kristen Welker has a piece today talking about encouraging these moderators to use the mute button, saying she had some trepidation, but she used it. I believe there is precedent to the moderators being the ones using it, but I'm not sure either.
God, that makes the moderator job so much harder.
But I don't know if that's
already
true.
pretty hard.
Can I say that? I think that the worst. I think the mute button is the worst of the things that the rules, because the problem, you've talked about this a lot. I think we've all talked about it on our shows, is this mismemory of who Trump is.
Right.
Is part of his advantage, right? That people don't really necessarily remember how chaotic he was. It's why he didn't get reelected. I worry that muting him gives him the opportunity to appear more stable than he really is. It makes him seem more normal because you won't be able to hear him freak out, which he will freak out.
Olivia Nuzzi last night made the point that the guy is incapable of self-control. So you're putting a self-control mechanism on him.
Yes.
To give him the self-control that he does not have, which is to stop interrupting. And again, the interruptions, you know, in terms of temperament or who's best suited for the job, the interruptions last time in that first debate were constant.
Yeah.
They did not illuminate the two men's different policy agendas, but they did illuminate the character of the man who was doing the interrupting.
Yeah. The other thing, sort of dynamic that we're writing into this, we're about a quarter of an hour away from it starting. And I'll just tell you guys right now, just in terms of housekeeping, as soon as we get to 9 o'clock on the dot Eastern, we've got like a really rigid countdown in terms of when we actually get started. So we're heading toward that moment. It's kind of, it's more than State of the Union, right? More like an Oval Office address in terms of the way that discipline works. But the other thing that's sort of coming into this, the baggage here, is just the history of what happens when incumbent presidents have their first debate. Incumbent presidents at their first debates almost always bomb.
Yep.
George H.W. Bush bombed. Barack Obama bombed. W. bombed. I mean, they all. Bill Clinton bombed. The first debate for an incumbent president when he is going for a second term is almost always, I think maybe always in the modern era, viewed as a disaster for the incumbent president. And I don't know if that's coincidence or if there's something about being president that uniquely sets you up to do poorly in your first debate.
Don't do a lot of debating.
Yeah.
But it also
nobody
goes to the
does.
question,
Presidents once each, right?
It goes to the question of, do debates matter? And I don't think you can find proof that they do. I don't think you can go back through the history beginning in 1960, where, you know, Nixon lost by less than 1%. That there's any debate where you can. I mean, I watched John Kerry win 3 in a row against George W. Bush. Win. And George W. Bush won 1.5% more votes in the end. I don't know that anyone who you know, can point to a single debate at any point in this process and say that one right there, that was the one.
Well,
that actually made a difference in the result.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say quickly that the other thing is that they usually happen much closer to voting. So on top of that, that's the other thing that's new here is we're in June. I don't like. Does anyone remember what happened 4 months ago?
But I think this is about narrative switching, and I think the reason Joe Biden said to Donald Trump, "Make my day," wasn't this zeal to debate, because they're acutely aware of all this history as well. I think it was the need for some dynamic switching, and I think some of it happened in the conviction. There's some dynamic switching, and in at least one poll among Trump support among independents, you had Carl with the whiteboard talking about it. But I think what the Biden gambit wasn't necessarily the race-changing dynamics of a debate, especially for an incumbent president, but was an appetite to see if there's some dynamic shifting, some narrative shifting, some of this seeing him for who he really is, the ugly, cruel, insane things. And I think that what may have put them over the edge, I don't know this, but when Fox stopped airing the speeches, it's like, And I got a call that Sunday that said, see if you can find out why Fox didn't carry the speech. I said, what was it crazy? He's off the walls. This was the first electrocution, but which Sarah Cooper has now, how to vote. She's back. I mean, it was bonkers.
So you're saying that you think Fox may have stopped carrying Trump's speeches because Trump's speeches were hurting him?
I have no idea why they stopped carrying them, but I know that they stopped carrying them. And I think it's around the same time that the debate comes to be. And I think that Biden had an appetite for the whole country to see Trump as he actually is today.
But also to see him, because I think for the Biden campaign, they understand that he really does have he has two fundamental problems. Fundamental problem number one is people not feeling good about their own economic lives and just not feeling they can afford things. There's some things he can do about that in debate, and there's some things he can't. But really the biggest drag for him is the age issue, the idea of whether he has the physical stamina to be president for another 4 years. And so the only reason to do a summer debate is that, first of all, they're seeing some polls shifting in his favor, and I think they would love to have some momentum that settles their own party. They need to settle Democrats on the idea that this guy can go the distance, that he's got 4 more years in him, that he's got the stamina to do it, and this is a perfect opportunity because it's going to have so many people watching. They can then have people go 2 weeks after this, then they watch Trump get sentenced, they watch him go to his convention. It's a good idea for Biden to be seen as stable, confident, strong, and capable right now.
Lawrence, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and remember, it was Joe Biden who picked the time and place. He's the one who started it, and he accepted this debate before Donald Trump did. Then Donald Trump accepted this debate. And so clearly, the Biden campaign at that point, if you recall, back when this move was made, there was still a lot of question out there among the voters who you need to reach eventually about who the nominees were going to be. You could do man on the street everywhere, and they go, "Oh, it's not going to be Biden and Trump, right?" I don't know, like, who's it going to be? And so the Biden campaign needed you to know it's going to be Biden and Trump. That was the central mission of that tactical move. We've got to get them to know as soon as possible it's going to be Biden and Trump. We cannot wait for conventions.
And to put it, I mean, I know this is a marginal issue, but to have all of the Trump donors pouring money on Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as if to keep the question alive as to who the viable candidates are. Him not making this debate tonight after having Trump donors invested literally tens of millions of dollars in him to try to get him up there, to try to muddy those waters, to try to prevent a dyad choice between these two, I think just underscores the importance of that.
Yeah, and Donald Trump the other day is saying that, Kennedy is good for him, that Jill Stein is good for him, that these third-party candidates are good for him. So he desperately wants those third-party candidates.
And the thing that you hear the Biden campaign say the most when you talk to Biden people, their favorite line is it's a binary choice. And they really want people to get their minds around the fact that it's Statler and Waldorf, and there really ain't no other Muppet. And that's it.
In terms of how this is, I mean, I got to say, I like Dana Bash and Jake Tapper very much. I feel I would not wish this job on my worst enemy in normal circumstances.
Very difficult.
But in these circumstances, with there's so much focus on the uniqueness of this debate, the way that it came out, the weird time that it is happening, the incredibly difficult rules, which very well may be under their literal control with them pushing buttons to turn microphones on and off. I mean, it was impossible before the entire Trump campaign and the candidate himself decided to start treating them as piñatas before the debate even started.
Plus, there's also just the sheer difficulty of choosing, right? So I would always interview, when I interview candidates in the primary, I'd say, like, what's your first bill? What's your priority? And politicians hate that. Like, everything's a priority. It's like, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So you got 90 minutes, you have a certain amount of questions, some things are not going to be asked, and people are going to be mad about that. And some things that are important, like really important, are not going to be asked because there's a limited amount of time and there's a lot of issues in the country. And so that's true of any debate that anyone has to moderate, but it's particularly high stakes here because it's 2 90-minute debates. There's not going to be a lot more of these. And I think particularly with Donald Trump, there are a lot of substantive questions that are pretty important to try to get him on the record.
Well, Trump offers a way to make the debate much simpler. And I suspect the moderators won't choose this because moderators are always, to some extent, interested in showing you how much they know in their framing of their question. But an excellent first question to Donald Trump would be, what is a tariff?
Yes, I completely agree. I completely agree.
Another question
Factual
for Donald
questions.
Trump, for both of them, would be, what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid?
Yes.
And Trump would be stumped. And if you follow that up with, which one of them pays for nursing homes? He's not going to get it right. And so you just go on and on. What does Social Security do? That's it. That's your whole question. And you would see the craziest stuff happen.
I nominate Lawrence.
Yes, I mean,
I love this. Yeah.
This has always been my fantasy about the best way to interview a candidate who lives on bluster rather than on knowledge, and who can proudly bluster their way through almost anything stylistically. But if the microphones are off and it is a one-on-one question and you can't wheedle out of it, I mean, literally, do you know, is a nuclear submarine a submarine with nuclear weapons? Or is there something else nuclear about it? I mean, like, those very basic questions, I think, actually would probably be the
And he can't
the
just
deadliest
gallop out of them, because, I mean, the thing is, what he loves to do, what I hope they don't ask, it is my least favorite question, will you accept the results? I mean, I guess they're going to ask sort of standard questions.
Some version of that.
There's some version of it, but I feel like Donald Trump is going to be asked like similar things that he's been asked before that he might be prepared for. Something factual, he won't be prepared because he literally doesn't know anything about government.
I'm also really curious. You know, he will show sometimes, Trump, instincts that are smart about politics, and particularly instincts for the middle. And I'm very curious how much he is sort of attempting to showcase.
What do you mean, instincts for the middle?
I mean, he understands, for instance, that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is bad for the Republican Party. He's smart enough to understand that, and that it's sort of hung around his neck because he did it, and that the smart political thing to do would be to tack towards the middle on abortion tonight. I think he'll probably do that because I think he's smart enough to understand it. Doesn't mean anything about what he'll actually do when in power, or the judges he would nominate, or what bills he would sign. There are other places he could do that on immigration. He could do that on climate. There are places where he is smart enough maybe to understand that it would look better for him to tack the middle. And the reason I thought of this is what Mitt Romney did in that first debate in 2012 that really knocked Barack Obama back, was that he really tacked hard to the middle. And every time that he was sort of confronted with something from the Ryan budget, he was like, no, I don't believe in that. No, we don't want to cut taxes for the rich. There was this very, very intentional attempt to kind of get to the middle, to get away from some of the least popular parts of Ryan policy. And again, you're just there for 90 minutes. So, like, you got an audience of 60 million people. You could sort of say whatever you want. It doesn't matter if that's what you're going to do or not.
I think the problem for that is that Trump will still be Trump. And I think he's more capable in 2024 this year. And I think this is part of why Fox isn't carrying him anymore, of maybe doing it tonally. Because you go back, he used to do interviews with Chris Matthews all the time. You look at them, and even when he was trying to sound non-lunatic-y, is that a word?
Yes, it is now.
He was still like, well, I think the question was, would you prosecute women who had an abortion? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he's still for really extreme stuff.
Yes,
so
right.
I think tonight there's a possibility that he sounds less crazy, but I think the stuff he's for now is so far out of the mainstream of even Republican thought.
That's the big question to me.
Related to the ignorance question. Like, did he know it was a really non-mainstream thing?
No idea.
Non-mainstream sounding thing to say women should be punished for having abortions? He didn't know that.
Right.
And then once he realized that was a bad thing to say, he then withdrew it, right? He then backtracked on it.
He's also a pleaser. I mean, he's also trying, this is his big television moment, and part of what he wants to do is please the people who like him. And the people who like him like really extreme things. So if he's
But they're not going to be there in the room clapping
to clap for him, right?
Interesting aspect.
But he's also smart enough to know that he's not going to want to lose them. He's not going to try to say things that will make them not like him anymore. So I don't know where he goes mentally if he's asked a question where he knows that the politic answer is one thing, but the answer that will please his fans is another. I don't know if his mind works well enough to figure that out, because, you know,
he's also incredibly adept. We should say this. Like, the thing that he is very adept at is not taking a position.
Yeah.
I mean, we are here now. It has been whatever many months since October 7th and the grinding war that came out of that in Gaza. And if you say this is a major campaign issue, there are two candidates. What is the Trump campaign position on the war in Gaza? There is no answer. There has been no answer. There is nothing. There is a muddle. Now, I kind of know what would be going on if Donald Trump were president, which would be full support for the Israeli government, no strings attached.
Well, the only thing he's actually said was at a fundraiser where he said he would crush the protests and deport any students who protested in favor of Palestine.
Yes.
So that's what we know he would do. That's not going to make a difference in the war.
But there's not, I mean, to the point, and this is something that he's smart about, right, is that he has not taken a position, and they have sort of unburden themselves of an expectation of taking one.
Yeah.
So there's no campaign website that you go to, as there would have been in any other campaign, and you go, Trump on the issues, and you pull down, and they have some statement on what the issue is.
Well, his answer is it would have never happened.
That's exactly what he says.
And it would be over in 5 days.
When the Republican Party in 2020 decided there would no longer be a Republican Party platform, and the Republican Party platform would just be whatever Trump is for, that's what we're for, that's when the Republican Party transitioned into a different kind of political entity.
Yes, right.
Because if you are not for anything other than what the leader wants, then you are not offering people a choice that's about governing. You're just offering people the leader principle, which it sounds better in the original German.
But to Chris's point, you can say anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say one of the things that Trump has been saying about Joe Biden in the lead up to tonight's debate is that Joe Biden is going to be on drugs. He keeps saying that over and over again. Joe Biden just tweeted, I don't know what they've got in these performance enhancers, but I'm feeling pretty jacked up.
That's pretty good.
Try it yourselves, folks.
Good.
See you in a bit. Right?
That's funny.
Yes.
Get real, Jack.
It's
just water.
It's just
pretty
water.
good.
Get real, Jack. So, I mean, we'll see. This is the on drugs thing is ridiculous, but it will absolutely become an article of faith among the Trump faithful and among the Republican Party faithful that there is some documented proof that President Biden is on drugs, right? They take these things that start off as the craziest thing imaginable, and that becomes an article of faith in their crowd.
My hot take is that if there is a drug that makes you better at debating or presidenting, you should take it. For sure, like every day. What are we doing here? What do we see? What, is it against the rules? Go ahead, buddy.
I know. As we've been told, this is going to be 90 minutes. The breaks that they're getting, there's 2 commercial breaks. What's going to happen during those is I think that we'll get to pop up here just for a quick second, not do any analysis or anything, but there will be commercials on our air as well. I think there has been a little bit of confusion in the public as to whether or not you have to watch this debate on CNN. You do not. You can watch it right here with us, and you can see the room sort of clearing out there in Atlanta as this starts. As this gets closer to the beginning. Again, this is the first of 2 debates. There will be another one in September, depending on how tonight's go and whether or not these guys decide they're going to show up for a second one. I think you could have gotten even money up to today as to whether or not Donald Trump was actually going to show up for this debate. But as we head into 9 o'clock Eastern, both men are there and it's happening. 9 o'clock Eastern right now means that the first presidential debate of 2024 is about to begin. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump will meet on stage in Atlanta for the first ever televised debate between a sitting president and a former president. The debate is being run by our friends at CNN, moderated by CNN anchors, but you can watch the debate right here along with us on MSNBC. The debate will be 90 minutes long. There will be no audience. Each candidate's microphone will be muted when it is the other's turn to speak. When the debate ends, me and my colleagues will be right here with reaction and analysis and a bunch of very special guests. We will have every second of the debate right here. So plan to stay with us for the duration. You do not need to go anywhere else. And now to tonight's debate between President Biden and former President Donald Trump.